best way to set up, to organize, and to control your yoga classroom. That's what we're going to talk about today. Hi everyone, my name is Jimmy Barkan. Been teaching hot yoga since 1981. If you're new to the channel, please consider subscribing, hit the notification bell, hit the like button anytime you're enjoying this video. If you're not new to the channel, I've actually added a few statues to my altar. I did a video a while back called My Yoga Altar, and I've explained what each one were. So these are some, not necessarily new additions that I have, but statues I had at my Fort Lauderdale studio that I brought home with me. Just a few additions, like this Lakshmi that I bought in India, made of sandalwood. And at the same time, I bought this Ganesh, both made of sandalwood. So anyway, they're very precious to me because I got them when I was in India. So getting your classroom set up is essential, and if you're a studio owner or if you're a regular teacher at a particular studio, then it's a much easier job because you pretty much know the room, you don't understand the temperature, especially if you're a hot yoga teacher. But let's say you're visiting, let's say you're doing a guest appearance at some studio. So what that brings us to our first point, and that's the temperature, especially in the hot yoga world. You may like the humidity a little higher, or you may like the temperature a little higher, or maybe the opposite. Maybe you want it a little bit lower. You got to talk to the owner, talk to the manager, understand where the controls are, and then let them know that you prefer this particular temperature and make sure there's a way that you can control it. If it gets too hot, you need to bring it down. If it's not hot enough, you know how to bring it up so you have the temperature and the environment under control. Now, I know in the Bikram world, they like to have it 40% humidity and 105 degrees. To me, I like, especially coming from South Florida, I like more humidity and less temperature. I like maybe a 60% humidity level and a degree of 98. In centigrade, it would be 40. Understanding that, and I should do a video on this one of these days, understanding that the humidity sets the heat index. So understanding the temperature and knowing how to control that temperature is key. Understanding where the students stand in class. If you've got a huge room that can fit 75 people, and unfortunately you only have, let's say, 5 or 6, you don't want to have one in this back corner and the other one in the front corner. You want to get them fairly close. Now we're in post-COVID times. You don't want them too close, but you want to at least have them cluster in the same area. If I had, let's say, 6 people in a large room, I'd have them all in a particular area. Now let's say you have a larger group. My suggestion is to have the new people in the back middle of the room, because now they have a reference point. They can look at the more advanced people or the more experienced students, and they can follow them. If your beginning student is in the front row, they're going to be lost. They're going to know what to do. They're going to be looking around their shoulders. I happen to turn the class to the right when we do postures like the triangle pose. So therefore, you wouldn't want your brand new student in the back right corner of the room because all of a sudden they're in the front row. So you have to understand that. Having the new student in the back middle is the best place for them. And on the other side of that coin, the more experienced, the more advanced people in the front as examples. Let's say you've got 3 or 4 brand new people and they come together. My suggestion is maybe to separate them a little bit because sometimes they may fall into a conversation. Maybe they're uncomfortable with the situation that might make them feel better, but having students talking in class can be very distracting, so you want to make sure that that doesn't happen. And you want to handle it in a way, I always say choose your battles wisely. You want to handle it in a way that's not going to disrupt the room, because if you do have people talking, and maybe they're not new people, anybody talking in class, for example, how do you handle it? But if you then display that you're upset with them in class, and all of a sudden you've projected this negative energy that comes across the room. So when people start talking in my class, I have a stock line that I use, and I'll say, just feel free to talk amongst yourselves. All of a sudden, I make a joke of it. They get it, they hear it, and 90% of the time they stop talking. They get it, and there's no negative energy that comes across the room. It's a positive energy, a sort of an entertaining energy, but at the same time the students hear it and they stop talking. You don't want them to talk, it's distracting. Now you're in the classroom and all of a sudden some students start to do completely different exercises. They start doing postures. Maybe they're not familiar with their class, and I talked about it in this video. Check it out after you see this one. That they may just don't want to do your postures, or they're uncomfortable doing their positions. It's important to understand the word entrainment. The classroom, everyone is moving the same way. And in that video, I talked about fish. When you see a massive school of fish all swimming in the same direction at the same time, they're in an entrainment mind. Or a flock of birds flying beautifully in formation, they're in an entrainment one mind. So the same thing you want to create in your yoga studio, in your yoga class, it's entrainment. It's one group flowing together. Vishnudevananda, a very famous Shivananda teacher, says the yoga room is not a democracy, it's a dictatorship. That doesn't mean that you have to rule in a way that they fear you, but at the same time you want to command a presence that they will respect you and follow along. I was doing a class with a very famous marquee teacher from the Iyengar world, and a woman was doing a completely different position. And he came over to her and he was very stern about it, but he said it just to her, and I was pretty close, I could hear it. And he whispers into her ear, he says, "It's taking me 25 years to calculate my words. Stay in class." All of a sudden, she heard it. Most people didn't. He was respectful enough not to call her out in front of the whole room, but all of a sudden she stopped doing what she was doing and she started to do what everybody else was. Want to make sure they're in entrainment and a one mind flowing together. So let's talk about correction and correcting your students. And I learned that from my teacher. One of the things that I do in my class is I make individual corrections. But there's an argument to be made on that subject. Some yoga teachers don't like to make individual corrections, or they're against it because they don't want to call that student out in front of the rest of the room. So let's say you have 10 people in the room and you correct 3 and then you neglect the other 7, maybe they'll think you're playing favorites, which can be an issue. So I like to try to include everybody when I'm making my corrections, but usually I will correct who I see needs that correction in the moment. We call that in the Barkan method teacher training program, we have a game we call "What's Wrong with This Picture?" Now, if you watch this video, I talk about sometimes there are anatomical differences you have to keep in mind, but knowing who to correct, how to correct becomes a science, and as you get more experience as a yoga teacher, you'll start to develop that art. Now, sometimes I'll correct people and they just don't listen to the correction, or they're stubborn within their own practice. And if I keep correcting and I don't see them responding, I may do one of two things. One, I may talk to them afterwards and say, "Look, but it doesn't seem like you're willing to make the correction. Is there something wrong? Do you have an issue?" But some people just don't want to be corrected, so I just leave them be. No more. I won't correct them anymore. In fact, I had somebody come up to me just recently and said, "I would rather you didn't correct me in the classroom because it's distracting for me. I'd rather find my own practice." So I had to respect her request, and I did. Usually, if you come to my class, I'm gonna dissect your practice and I'm gonna correct you. It really depends on the type of yoga teacher you choose to be, making corrections, not making corrections, who to correct and who not to correct. But controlling the yoga room is an art form. In the Bikram world, a lot of the brand new teachers would come out of the Bikram yoga training. And I was guilty of the same thing when I first started teaching. And they become very much into the discipline, very much into not necessarily yelling at people, sometimes yelling, focusing more on the discipline, not on the yoga. And I did the same thing. And I think it was because we weren't really sure about what we were doing yet. As I evolved in my career, I commanded their respect just by being in the room. And I made yoga the attention, not necessarily the discipline. There is discipline involved, but the yoga to me was more important in getting that message across. Yes, you've got to control that room, but at the same time, if you do it in such a negative way, that dictatorial way, that will then take away from the energy that you want to create. The synergy you're going to create between you and the class, it becomes this wonderful unit of everyone flowing in the same way and having this extraordinary experience afterwards, off the mat into the world. So that's our episode for today. Thank you so much for watching. If you're new to the channel, please consider subscribing, hit the notification bell, smash the like button if you enjoyed this video, control that classroom, and I'll see you at the next video. Bye, guys.